Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, the Supreme Court hears President Trump's challenge to birthright citizenship and his effort to restrain lower court judges who block his policies.
Ukrainian and Russian officials prepare to meet in Turkey for peace talks, but who will and will not be at the meeting raises questions about whether Russia is serious about making a deal.
And a federal judge whose son was murdered speaks out about increasing threats to judges.
There are severe consequences to the type of rhetoric that is being used. And I fear for the safety of judges and their families.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
A successful business owner sells his company and restores his father's historic jazz club with his son. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you bring people together. Life well planned.
and friends of the NewsHour, including Robert S. Kaplan and Wendy J. Selden through the Raymond James Charitable Endowment Fund. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments in one of the most consequential cases of the year, the ability for President Trump to carry out his executive order ending birthright citizenship. That's the constitutionally protected right of citizenship for those born in the United States, regardless of their parents' nationality or immigration status.
The central question in this case, though, is the limits of judicial power, namely universal injunctions, which allow a federal judge to issue a nationwide block to executive orders. In recent months, several district court judges have used nationwide injunctions to pause a number of the Trump administration's policies, including an executive order which seeks to end birthright citizenship. Today, the government argued those judges are overstepping their constitutional authority. Earlier, President Trump weighed in, posting on social media, quote, "Birthright citizenship is about the babies of slaves, and it had nothing to do with illegal immigration for people wanting to scam our country." We will sort that out in a moment. But outside the court today, a group of attorneys general who are challenging the president's order said the question of birthright citizenship has long been settled.
157 years ago, we came together as a nation post-Civil War and said never again were we going to debate whether babies born on American soil are entitled to the rights and privileges of American citizenship. And contrary to what the United States is saying, citizenship doesn't turn on or turn off when you cross state lines.
And joining us now to discuss today's arguments are Amanda Frost, professor of Immigration and Citizenship Law at the University of Virginia, and Amy Howe, co-founder of SCOTUS blog, and our new Supreme Court analyst here at the NewsHour. Welcome to you both. And Amy, it's great to have you here officially in your new role.
Thanks very much.
So several justices today underscored the fact that the focus of today's arguments wasn't really about the merits of the case, but rather on nationwide injunctions. What's your sense of why that was the government's focus and strategy?
I think the government was trying to isolate this. This is an issue that has been the bane of both Democratic and Republican administrations, as the Trump Solicitor General D. John Sauer said in his presentation to the justices. This is a bipartisan issue, and it has the issue of universal injunctions has really stopped the Trump administration from being able to implement a variety of policies and orders since the start of the Trump administration on January 20th. And they really wanted the justices to focus on these universal injunctions, including because in recent years, several justices have expressed skepticism about the propriety of universal injunctions and suggested that the courts should weigh in on them.
On that point, the fact that this has been debated, how much power federal judges should have to block controversial White House policies nationwide, how sympathetic were the justices to this idea that these injunctions are a problem for the rule of law at large?
Yeah, so I think the justices, many of whom have had experience in the executive branch themselves in previous administrations, are generally looking to try to limit or restrict nationwide injunctions. They don't like the fact that a democratically elected president sees their policies stymied or stopped in their tracks by a single district court judge. Justice Alito mentioned being concerned about 680 district court judges across the nation having this power, and he said, they can get it wrong. But on the flip side, they're dealing with a president that has unilaterally rewritten the law through executive order, or tried to, and the birthright citizenship executive order is a perfect example of that.
And the premise of the government's argument was really picked apart by the liberal wing of the court. Justice Jackson addressed the U.S. Solicitor General and warned that if the Supreme Court were to narrow the scope of nationwide injunctions, it could effectively permit the administration to carry out unlawful actions while leaving individuals without meaningful recourse. Take a listen.
The real concern, I think, is that your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive, where everybody has to have a lawyer and file a lawsuit in order for the government to stop violating people's rights. And I don't understand how that is remotely consistent with the rule of law.
How did that land?
It landed, I think it was something that the other justices picked up on, some of the other liberal justices, but some of the other justices, some of the conservative justices were also expressing concern about, even though this was ostensibly a case about universal injunctions, about the merits of Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship and whether or not this was something that the justices were going to have to weigh in on either in this dispute or, in a future dispute. Justice Neil Gorsuch, for example, said, how can we get to this issue expeditiously?
And on the specific issue of whether it's practical to end birthright citizenship, a lot of people are focused on what conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh said. Here he is.
On the day after it goes into effect, this is just a very practical question how this is going to work. What do hospitals do with a newborn? What do states do with a newborn?
So how did the government answer that question?
I thought the government answered that question very poorly. And I was surprised, in fact, that they had almost no answer to how they were going to implement this executive order. And if they win this case in the Supreme Court, 30 days from now, that order would go into effect. There's 3.6 million children born in the United States every year, and every single one of those families would have to find a way to prove their child's citizenship when the birth certificate alone, showing proof of birth in the U.S., no longer suffices. I was really shocked they didn't have an answer, and it played well into the hands of the plaintiffs who were saying there's going to be chaos if you let this executive order go into effect while the case is pending. That's the key. What happens while the case is pending before the Supreme Court rules? That could be at least a year. And the idea that it would go into effect without any plan about how to implement it is a huge problem for the administration.
What struck you about the line of questioning there?
I think exactly the same thing. I think that the justices really were having a hard time, even though this was ostensibly an argument about universal injunctions, we're really having a hard time separating the two. And, a lot of them, I think, may have gone in sort of predisposed, or at least when they agreed to take up the case, predisposed to the idea that they disliked universal injunctions. And particularly in the context of this case, and as the questioning from Justice Kavanaugh suggested, when you're talking about birthright citizenship and maybe talking about universal injunctions more broadly, it's maybe not quite as simple as they thought.
The fact that the president, the administration, is spearheading this effort to end birthright citizenship, we can't lose sight of how really seismic that is.
Yeah, I mean, this is birthright citizenship was intended to overrule Dred Scott, which said no black person could be a citizen. and to integrate the children of immigrants into our society, ensure their citizenship. That's what the Reconstruction Congress said. So if you're an originalist, you should be all in on the idea of near universal birthright citizenship. And it's been basically unquestioned for over a century. And to have a president declare by executive order that he can rewrite it, I mean, that is seismic.
Amy, what's the timeline here?
It's hard to say exactly what the timeline is. A couple of years ago, the Supreme Court heard arguments on 2 other cases that came up on the emergency docket involving the Biden administration vaccine mandates and issued decisions in those in just a couple of days. On the other hand, they've also taken a couple of months to act on an emergency application involving an EPA rule. What we do know is that the justices will almost certainly take their summer recess at the end of June or the beginning of July, and I would expect them to have resolved this by then.
Amy Howe, Amanda Froster, thanks to you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Online, you can watch our in-depth report about the history and legacy of birthright citizenship and the 1898 Supreme Court case that confirmed the current legal precedent. That's at pbs.org/newshour.
President Trump continued his tour of the Mideast today with a trip to the United Arab Emirates. The Gulf nation promised significant investment in the U.S. and partnership on AI technology and infrastructure. Nick Schifrin has that story.
Tonight in Abu Dhabi, the carpet was gray, and the fans were adoring for the president's third state visit in 3 days, full of pomp and circumstance. The Emirates' first astronaut gave President Trump a tour of the presidential palace before the UAE bestowed on President Trump its National Medal of Honor. And President Mohammed bin Zayed promised to invest $1.4 trillion in the U.S. in the next 10 years.
This partnership has taken a significant leap forward since you have taken office.
I know you'll never leave my side. I know that. And you know the special relationship that we have and our country has. So our country's back with you.
This is an incredible culture, that I can say.
All week, President Trump has been showered with the Gulf monarchy's economic and cultural riches. Today, the Grand Mosque. And in return, President Trump has endorsed Gulf priorities, including making a diplomatic deal over Iranian nuclear enrichment.
Iran has sort of agreed to the terms. They're not going to make, I call it in a friendly way, nuclear dust. We're not going to be making any nuclear dust in Iran. And we've been strong. I want them to succeed. I want them to end up being a great country.
Today's agreements also include a U.S. commitment to share AI technology with the Emirates and for the Emirates to turn away from Chinese technology. And President Trump promised the Gulf the American military assistance it desires.
As president, my priority is to end conflicts, not start them, but I will never hesitate to wield American power if it's necessary to defend the United States of America or our partners. And this is one of our great partners right here.
But what the president could not accomplish on this trip, a breakthrough over the war in Ukraine, after Russia sent a lower-level delegation to peace talks that were supposed to have been with President Zelensky.
I'm not disappointed. What would I be disappointed? We just took in $4 trillion, and he says that you're disappointed about a delegation. I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay?
It's not clear the timing for that possible Trump-Putin meeting, but Secretary of State and Interim National Security Advisor Marco Rubio said it would be determined after the president returns to Washington late tomorrow and after tomorrow's talks between Russia and Ukraine.
So, Nick, we expected those talks today. Tell us more about what happened there and also what each side is saying ahead of their meeting tomorrow.
It was a bit of a diplomatic dust-up today in Turkey. The Ukrainian and Russian delegations landed in different cities. The Russian delegation ended up waiting in Istanbul for a Ukrainian delegation that didn't even show up. And the two delegations were really lopsided. Zelensky was there in Turkey with his most senior aides, but Putin was a no-show and sent relatively mid-level officials, what Zelensky called a decorative group. Despite all that, tomorrow, Turkey will host the first face-to-face meeting between Russia and Ukraine in some 3 years since 2022. But as we heard there, President Trump said the deal was only possible if he and President Putin sat in the same room. And today we heard that echoed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
We don't have high expectations of what will happen tomorrow. And frankly, at this point, I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin. It's going to require that level of engagement to have a breakthrough in this matter. I don't think anything productive is actually going to happen from this point forward until they engage in a very frank and direct conversation, which I know President Trump is willing to do.
Now, as for the substance of tomorrow, Amna, Russia continued its maximalist stance. We heard from the foreign ministry in Moscow today, tying Russian military gains in Ukraine with their diplomatic demands on the table. And the chief Russian negotiator said today that Ukraine needed to solve the, quote, root causes of the war. And Russia has defined that as capping the size of Ukraine's military, Ukraine's ability to get Western support at all, but also the presence of U.S. and NATO troops in Eastern Europe. All of that is dead on arrival for Ukraine and the West. And that led Zelensky today to question Russia's commitment to peace.
Russia must demonstrate something, either a high level of delegation or a level of leaders or some decisions, something. If there is no such demonstration, it means that Russia is not ready to talk about the end of the war and to make a decision. It means that there is not enough political will, and it means that Russia does not feel it needs to end this war.
And the fact is, Amna, it does not appear that Russia feels the need to end this war.
Nick Schifrin, thank you as always.
Thank you.
We start the day's other headlines with the impact of President Trump's tariffs. The nation's largest retailer, Walmart, is planning to raise prices in the coming weeks, citing Trump's policies as a driving factor. Walmart's head said today that, quote, given the magnitude of the tariffs, we aren't able to absorb all the pressure given the reality of narrow retail margins. Walmart posted strong quarterly sales today, but declined to give a profit outlook due to ongoing economic uncertainty. In the meantime, consumers are growing increasingly uneasy. New government data shows that the pace of retail sales slowed sharply in April from the month before. A judge in Wisconsin pleaded not guilty today to federal charges over accusations she helped a man evade federal immigration agents. Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan allegedly escorted the person out the back door of her courtroom last month as agents sought his arrest for being in the U.S. illegally.
Get angry, get loud.
Dozens of demonstrators gathered outside the courthouse ahead of today's hearing. Dugan's arrest has been a flashpoint in the broader tensions over President Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown. She could face up to 6 years in prison if convicted. A federal judge has dismissed charges against dozens of migrants who'd been detained for trespassing in a newly designated militarized zone at the southern border. The Trump administration recently transferred oversight of a 180-mile strip of land in New Mexico to the military. Entering the area unauthorized carries a potential sentence of at least a year in prison. But today, a U.S. District Court judge ruled that the government had provided, quote, no facts from which one could reasonably conclude that the defendant knew he was entering the zone. The migrants could still face other misdemeanor charges and deportation. Turning overseas, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens of people across Gaza overnight and into today. Hospital officials in the southern city of Khan Yunis say at least 54 people were killed in a series of attacks, while in the north, explosions reverberated in Jabalia, where Gaza's civil defense says 13 people were killed. It all comes on the anniversary of the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, when in 1948, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly displaced from what is now Israel. One woman who lived through that experience says today's violence is even worse.
Today we're in a bigger Nakba than the Nakba we saw before. We are not living. There is no life, no children, no people, no food or drink. How long must we remain like this? Where can we go?
Today, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters he is troubled by the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He also spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who earlier this week vowed to, quote, complete the mission by destroying Hamas. Back here at home, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a measure today that blocks local governments in the state from adding fluoride to their water. During a bill signing event in Dade City, DeSantis said that forcing the mineral into the water supply is, quote, basically forced medication. Florida is now the second state to implement such a ban after Utah. State lawmakers approved the bill last month despite concerns from dentists and public health advocates who say it could have long-lasting health consequences. Florida's ban takes effect on July 1st. On Wall Street today, stocks drifted a bit following the latest economic reports. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added about 270 points on the day. The Nasdaq gave back some ground after recent gains, losing more than 30 points. The S&P 500 rose for a fourth straight day. One of the architects of America's hydrogen bomb has died. Richard Garwin was only 23 when he built the world's first fusion bomb. He later advocated for arms control, worked on early technologies that led to things like touchscreen monitors, and advised presidents from Eisenhower to Obama. In the fall of 2016, it was Obama who awarded him the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award. Richard Garwin was 97 years old. And a discovery of note. Historians at Harvard University say a document in their archives, long believed to be a copy of the Magna Carta, is actually one of the earliest versions of the medieval text dating back to the year 1300. The university purchased the tattered piece of parchment in 1946 for less than $30, which would be about $500 today. It was wrongly cataloged at the time. After coming across it on the law school library's website, professors noticed the smallest of details, certain letters capitalized, quirks in penmanship, and realized what they'd found.
They bought it for peanuts in 1946 from an auctioneer, Sweet and Maxwell, who equally seemed to have no idea what it was. Harvard Law School have indeed, unbeknownst to them, got an original of the 1300 Magna Carta, an original, therefore, of one of the most famous documents in world constitutional history.
Until now, there were only 6 known editions of the 1300 Magna Carta issued by Britain's King Edward I. The document was first issued in 1215 and established the principle of the law of the land, which influenced the framers of the U.S. Constitution, among many others. Harvard estimates their version is worth millions of dollars, but has no plans to sell it. Still to come, on the NewsHour, we examine the causes behind a significant drop in opioid overdose deaths. Retired Army General Stanley McChrystal discusses his new book on character. And one chef leads the movement to bring traditional Lao food to diners across the country.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President Trump's frustration with the judicial branch has only grown since he re-entered the White House, and many of his policy priorities have been slowed down or blocked in courts. Mr. Trump and members of his administration have been openly critical of some judges, calling them radical, lunatics, or lawless, and suggesting some should be impeached. A recent report from the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism found, quote, violent threats and calls for impeachment against judges have risen by an alarming 327% between May of 2024 and March of 2025. Yesterday, leadership from the Judicial Conference, that's the policymaking group of federal judges, testified on Capitol Hill, seeking a nearly 20% budget increase for security measures. One federal judge knows how real the threat of violence can be. Nearly 5 years ago, Judge Esther Salas's husband was shot and her son Daniel was killed by a disgruntled lawyer posing as a delivery driver at her home, according to police. Judge Salas from the U.S. District Court of New Jersey joins me now. Judge, welcome to the NewsHour, and thank you so much for making the time to join us.
Thank you for having me, Abna.
So since these incidents began, we should note that you have been meeting with the U.S. Marshals Service. You just met with them today, in fact. What can you tell us about that meeting and whether you think they're doing enough to keep you and other judges safe?
Well, I want to start with the last question, and that's yes. I think they are doing all that they can do to keep up with the onslaught of attacks against the judiciary. I did meet with representatives today. The meeting went well, and I can tell you that they have confirmed for me what I've known for some time, which is that there are over 100 pizzas that have been delivered to judges, children, and now recently they're sending pizzas to judges, their children, and utilizing my murdered son's name. They're weaponizing my child's name to really impact fear on judges all throughout this country.
You're, of course, referencing the spate of recent anonymous pizza deliveries to judges that we've seen, as you mentioned, many of them using your late son's name. And we should tell folks, Congress passed a law in your late son's name that was supposed to help judges remove personal information from online, like home addresses and phone numbers and such. The fact that these deliveries are happening in this way, does that say to you the law is not working?
No, what it says to me is that the law is working, but we have to remember what the Anderl Act does. The Anderl Act protects judges, federal judges, and shields their personally identifiable information on federal websites. The problem we have right now is many states have not enacted state laws that would serve as belt and suspenders to the federal law. So a lot of this information is accessible on state websites. So what we need to do is have the states and the federal government coordinate so that we can shield the very information that is now that the bad actors are utilizing to inflict psychological warfare on judges.
You know, there are some who will look at this and say, how threatening is it to have a pizza show up at your door? Why is that considered a threat and not a prank? What would you say to that?
I would say to those people that this is not a prank. This is certain bad actors that you send a pizza to a judge. It says, we know where you live. You send a pizza to a judge's child. You're saying to that judge, we know where your child lives. You send a pizza to a judge or that judge's child in my murdered son's name, and it says, do you want to end up like Daniel Anderl? Do you want to end up like Judge Salas? Those are acts of intimidation. This is a concerted effort by a few bad actors to attempt to intimidate the judges. This is serious. This needs to be taken very seriously by our government, and we need to know that the investigation will be supported and that we are supported by this administration and supported by the Department of Justice. In today's environment, with this inflammatory rhetoric that is being used against judges, it isn't helping the situation. I think it is only exacerbating the situation.
Judge Salas, you mentioned that rhetoric. Much of that has come from President Trump himself, attacking individual judges, calling for them to be impeached. The White House would argue the president has the right to say he disagrees with the judge if they rule in a way that's not favorable to him. And Chief Justice John Roberts has even said some criticism is okay as long as you're not attacking judges. What do you make of that and where that line is, especially when it comes to the president?
I have absolutely no problem with anyone in the administration, anyone in a position of power, anyone with a large media platform criticizing our rulings. Absolutely no problem with that. What I have is when they begin to really accuse us of being partisan and there is no basis for that accusation. When they use inflammatory rhetoric, like calling us rogue judges or calling us crazy leftist unconstitutional judges, that's not responsible leading. That is language that is irresponsible. And when our leaders lead by using inflammatory rhetoric, they are inviting people to do us harm. And we have to remember that lives are at stake. I don't have my son anymore. My son is no longer on earth, my only child. I can tell you right now, there are severe consequences to the type of rhetoric that is being used. And I fear for the safety of judges and their families. And I fear for our nation if we allow this conduct to continue to go unchecked with civility and professionalism and an agreement to disagree. But let's bring it back to the merits of an issue instead of bringing it to personal attacks. That's all we're asking.
That is Judge Esther Salas from the U.S. District Court of New Jersey. Judge Salas, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much and have a good day.
Drug overdose deaths in the U.S. last year plunged to their lowest annual level since 2019, or before the pandemic. That's according to CDC data published yesterday. Our John Yang joins us now with more. John?
Jeff, the numbers show that in 2024, nationwide overdose deaths fell by nearly 30,000 from the year before. That's a drop of about 27%. There were declines across all major categories of drug use, including opioids, the source of most overdose deaths in the past decade. Brian Mann reports on issues related to addiction for NPR. Brian, how big a deal is this?
This is the most dramatic thing we've seen really since the opioid crisis began in the 1990s, a 27% drop in deaths. It's unprecedented. The researchers I talked to say it's so vast that there's a real mystery here about why it's improving so quickly. It's also continuing. We've now seen about 16 months in a row where these dramatic improvements have continued. And so after years of a really apocalyptic situation with fentanyl and other street drugs, we finally have some truly good news here.
What are the factors that brought this about? What do people credit for this?
You know, again, it's one of the things that's fascinating as a reporter covering this is that there is uncertainty there. There is a mystery at the heart of this. But people point in part to the huge public health response that expanded under the Biden administration. We really started to see the numbers coming down as early in some places as 2021. Also, street fentanyl appears to be getting weaker in many areas, which is a phenomenon that people are trying to understand. I want to mention one sad piece of this, that there's been so much death over the last 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of people in the U.S. have already succumbed to fentanyl and other street drugs. Many of the most vulnerable people are already gone.
The numbers came out from the CDC even as HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. was on the Hill talking about cutting federal health programs. House Republicans were working on plans to cut Medicaid. Are there concerns, the people you talk to, the experts you talk to, are they concerned that this trend may be reversed?
I think there's real fear. I talk to researchers, I talk to frontline physicians, people who are trying to save lives, and they point to Medicaid, the source of the largest single stream of funding for insurance for people struggling with addiction, programs that have been trying to research addiction and what the new deadly drugs are that are appearing on the streets, right? There are these new synthetic drugs popping up all the time. Fentanyl is kind of almost old news now. And if we lose the ability to track these new drugs, we could be flying blind. There's also just kind of discussion of chaos. You know, the same thing that we sometimes hear around tariffs, like, are they on, are they off? Well, the magnitude of cuts that are being proposed here, they're really sending shockwaves. People don't know how to start new programs, whether they should continue programs. So yeah, at a time when there's all this good news, a lot of people are saying, you know, if it ain't broke, why are we upending everything like this? And I think that'll be a big part of the debate we're hearing on Capitol Hill as these budgets are debated.
Is drug use declining, or is it just less lethal?
Among young people, drug use is down dramatically. I think it's important to say that a lot of people who are surviving are still very ill. They're still very deeply addicted. Survival, however, and again, this is important to point to the good news here, the longer people survive in severe addiction, the better chance they have of recovering. And even if they're still on dangerous drugs like methamphetamines or fentanyl, if we're keeping them alive, there's a shot that they're going to heal and really get better. And in fact, this is important for people to know, most people do eventually get better if we keep them alive.
And there's been a trend in caring for addiction, treating it, managing it as a disease rather than a failure, a moral failure. Has that helped?
I think there are people who are working on the front lines of this that say the public health response has been revolutionary. It's been crucial to helping bring these numbers down. It's probably not the whole picture, but it's a big factor. And one thing that we really could be seeing right now with the Trump administration's policies is a shift back towards the drug war, back towards targeting the drug cartels with a really militant, possibly even including boots on the ground in Mexico is something that's been talked about. And so that's going to be an interesting thing over the next 4 years. Do we see that public health response continue, or do we see a shift back towards policing and big drug busts?
What are some of the other public health changes that are responsible for this, do you think?
I think getting the big one is naloxone and Narcan. There's this medication that gets into the community where people can literally reverse a fentanyl overdose or an opioid overdose. Before that was there, people just died. And now even many of the people in severe addiction that I talk to, they carry this and they use together. And again, I don't want to say this is a happy outcome. People are still severely addicted, but they've learned how to survive, to use that kind of medication. It is also true that there are better and better medical care responses here. You know, buprenorphine, methadone, these are medications that really do help people recover long term. And I think there's a big push that's happened over the past 2 or 3 years to get more people onto that kind of advanced health care. We're going to have to see whether the funding remains going forward for more and more people to get into long-term medical recovery.
Brian Mann of NPR, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
General Stanley McChrystal was the top commander of American and international forces in Afghanistan in 2009 when his career was cut short. An article in Rolling Stone quoted him and his aides making candid yet disparaging remarks about President Obama and Vice President Biden. McChrystal resigned after 35 years in the Army. Among the units he led in that career, the Joint Special Operations Command, which hunted down al-Qaeda in Iraq when the United States was bogged down in that war. He now has his own consulting firm and is the author of a new book, On Character: Choices That Define a Life. I spoke with him earlier this week and began by asking him about the current leadership at the Pentagon and the controversy around Defense Secretary Hegseth's sharing of classified information on a commercial messaging app.
Well, like most Americans, I'm concerned about the Department of Defense because it's responsible for all our defense. If I look at something like Signalgate, as we'll call it, you know, mistakes get made. To me, that came across as people acting in an amateurish fashion. And they make a mistake and you move on. But you accept responsibility for that mistake. And what bothered me most about that particular incident was the days after, when professionals who were involved in that went in front of television, and I think some testified in front of Congress, and they claimed that the information was not classified. And they know better.
And what's the impact of that? I mean, I've had several conversations with people who've said, had it been anyone else in the military, obviously lower ranking than the Secretary of Defense, had they done what Secretary Hegseth did, there would be consequences. The fact that there were none, what message does that send?
I fear that it sends a lack of seriousness. I think that somebody junior would have been held to account. And most people junior believe they would have been held to account. And so I think the nation needs to have confidence that we are going to fix the mistakes we will make, for sure. And so going forward, I think it's critical that we establish that culture of accountability.
After you assumed command of the U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan, you issued guidance that would reduce the number of civilian casualties. That was a priority for you. One source that we spoke to who studies this said the casualties from airstrikes dropped 60% because of the policies and the protocols that you put into place. There are now civilian harm mitigation teams at every combatant command. What do you make now of the decision by this administration to stop funding those teams? What will happen as a result of that?
I think it will turn out to be something we need to refund again in the future because we relearn a lot of lessons. You know, in Afghanistan, when we made that decision and we worked very hard to reduce civilian casualties, it wasn't just because we were nice people or that it was the morally right thing to do, which it was. We did it because we judged that the only way we could succeed in that effort was to win the support of the population. And you don't win the support of the population by killing them.
Back here at home, I should note you spend a good part of the book on Gettysburg, about this place that clearly holds a special resonance for you, why it matters today in particular. And you write in the book, we must remember Gettysburg and why it happened. The veneer of unity and civilization we take for granted is too familiar to feel fragile. Yet North and South tore at each other less than a century after uniting to create a nation. Of course, it could happen again. You're saying, of course, it could happen again. Are you worried about that level of violence in America because of our divisions today?
I am, and I worry that we sometimes talk about those things sort of lightly. We say we have big divisions, people don't like each other, there's lots of guns in society and different militias and whatnot, and we just assume that nothing like that could repeat itself. But on a small level, it could do it tomorrow. On a large level, it could do it very easily. And if we look at other nations, civilized nations that have had significant problems, when Germany descended into Nazi rule, when the United States broke into civil war, I think we need to pay attention and we need to act with the kind of seriousness that the current divisions represent.
You know, when you talk about the politics of this moment, you also reference leaders who easily lie, some acting with craven opportunism, debasing themselves for political success. I'm paraphrasing some of your descriptions here. But General, you never name names. You're never specific with some of those allegations. So if you're talking about President Trump or others around him, why not say who you're talking about?
As soon as you mention any name, you lose half of the American population. They will literally turn it off because they don't want to hear it. If I talked about President Biden, and I think that the people around him potentially didn't represent his condition in the last year of office completely, honestly to the American people, that's a disappointment. If I do the same with people in President Trump's circle on things that disappoint me, I think it's not limited to one party. I think it starts with us as individuals, but it is too broad for us to say it's just those people. If we get rid of those people, we'll solve the problem.
So much of the book is about country and character, but there's some very personal reflections in here as well. There was one that struck me in particular. The amount of time you spend talking about your granddaughters, Emmylou, Elsie, and Daisy, who you clearly adore, is wonderful. But if there's an ounce of regret in the book, it's a couple of lines you write about your son, Sam. You write, I wasn't a great father. In retrospect, I regret things I didn't do as a father, but thankfully avoided doing many things I would have regretted. If I could do it all again, I believe I would be a better father. But I don't believe Sam could be a better son. Why include that? What would you do differently?
Well, yeah, I was very focused on my career. I didn't have a lot of other hobbies, but still, I didn't do many of the things that other fathers did with their sons. Then I left for Afghanistan when my son, right before he graduated from high school, I essentially came back from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Afghanistan again after he'd finished college and had moved on. And so I wasn't a lot of things that my father had been to me. Now, the beauty is I get a second chance because my son lives next door to me now, along with my granddaughters. So I see him every day. We have a very close relationship, but you can't make up for things you didn't do.
The book is on character, choices that define a life. The author is retired General Stanley McChrystal. General, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Food can be a tangible and accessible way to understand and connect with different cultures. One chef has led the movement to bring traditional food from her home country of Laos to diners across the country. Laura Barone Lopez reports for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Thank you so much for coming. For Chef Sang Luangla, dinner here at her Tip Cow restaurant in Washington, D.C. is about more than the food.
Right, I saw you order lab alligator. I was like, oh, I gotta go to that table.
It's amazing. It's a chance to highlight the rich heritage and culinary artistry of Laos, a country she fled in 1981 at age 12 with her mother, uncle, and 2 brothers after her father was taken to a labor camp.
We have to cross the Mekong River at 3 o'clock in the morning through a small, tiny boat. Then we have to walk about our chest height water to the other side of the riverbank in Thailand.
Some 300,000 people fled the landlocked country in the years after 1975. That was after the failure of both the Vietnam War and the massive covert 9-year bombing campaign in Laos led by the U.S., known as the Secret War.
When we get to the Thai border, we heard gunshots. So we heard people trying to escape. Either people trying to escape after us, or they just shoot up in the sky when they saw us.
Many temporarily settled in refugee camps in northern Thailand. That's where Chef Sang, as she's now known, learned to prepare dishes from across Laos that are still reflected in her cooking today.
I have a stronger flavor profile because of what I had learned in refugee camps and also when I came to America, and also meet different people from all over Laos.
Once she settled in the U.S., her love of food grew. But she only cooked Lao food for her family and people who were already familiar with the flavors and strong aroma.
I grew up have to hide. My parents would say, if you eat Lao food, don't eat in front of your friends. I was doing that to my son too. I packed food for him and I said, just be careful because we don't want your friend to smell. It's like something that we were hiding, why we should be hiding.
In 2010, she became a professional chef, buying her first restaurant, Bangkok Golden, in nearby Falls Church, Virginia. But her friends and family discouraged her from serving Lao food.
And they were like, well, I don't think you should do it because Thai is marketable. Lao is not marketable. Nobody knows where Laos is. And, of course, in my mind at the time, I use that as my inspiration, as my motivation. People come for Thai buffet and then will ask, are you here for the buffet or are you here for Lao food? A lot of people were shocked. They'd never heard of that. They was like, what is Lao food? So then we start educating people, about, Laos, Lao food.
You just have to talk about it.
Talk about it and teach how to eat it. Because Lao food is very pungent. It's a lot of padak, which is fermented fish sauce. And there's also a lot of different exotic ingredients like, spice, and also like a lot of fresh herbs. So we also taught people how to eat it with rice instead of eating with lettuce or by itself like a salad. So we taught people how to grab sticky rice and roll it up in the ball and eat it with lap.
Mm-hmm. She renamed Bangkok Golden in 2017 to Padek, the very sauce she was taught to hide. This DC location, Tip Cow, is a nod to the rice baskets that serve sticky rice, an integral part of Lao cuisine and culture.
Can you smell it?
Although many Americans are familiar with Thai papaya salad, she showed me how it's used in the Lao version, known as tamakun.
That has a spice. I can't embarrass my family. I gotta handle the spice.
Her recipe for success has won over diners from all different backgrounds, including Lao Americans.
I remember bringing my parents here for the first time and seeing non-Lao people eating Lao food was incredible. I think my parents were about to cry. I think I was about to cry. It was really special to get to move to a new city and then have a place that felt like home.
I knew of Laos as a region, but I've never tried the food. It's really important to recognize where people are from and what made them who they are.
Chef Sang now runs 4 restaurants in and around the Washington area and hosts frequent pop-up events like this recent backyard barbecue and market in Arlington. She's also become the godmother of what's known as the Lao food movement that encourages chefs to embrace their heritage and history.
I think it's so important to learn the culture, to teach people. The only way that I would say I thought about teaching people where Laos is, put Laos on the map, the only way I can do is through food.
Lao restaurants have popped up across the U.S. in cities big and small in recent years, including Morganton, North Carolina, Rockford, Illinois, and Wasilla, Alaska. Many run by chefs Luong Loth helped mentor along the way.
She gave me some advice on what to do and to follow my instincts, follow my gut, follow my palate.
Chef Jeff Chonchalin opened his restaurant, Madair, in Oklahoma City in 2021, after spending more than 2 decades working at Japanese restaurants there.
I wanted to go back to my roots to do Lao food because I was kind of ashamed and felt terrible about abandoning my culture for so long.
The restaurants won critical acclaim in national press, and like Chef Sang, he emphasizes teaching through food.
And I'm trying to make up for that now by learning as much as I can. I'm learning every day, and as I'm learning, I am hopefully training and educating my staff so that they can educate the diners, and those diners, you can spread the word, because with this food and with this culture, a lot of it kind of spreads by word of mouth.
Keeping that history alive is what keeps Chef Sang going.
It's also bring me a happiness, bring me as a person, a better person. I'm proud of who I am, proud of my culture. Now I can sing out loud, I'm loud and proud.
You can scream it.
Yes.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone Lopez in Washington.
The latest Republican spending measure is likely to undergo substantial changes in the coming days as it winds its way through the House. But currently, it includes a plan to give $1,000 to every baby born between 2025 and the end of 2028. It's an idea that was first proposed by economic scholar Derek Hamilton. Here is his brief but spectacular take on so-called baby bonds.
We have the ethos that if you just study hard, if you just work hard, if you just make great decisions, that one can accumulate wealth. Now, certainly, studying hard, working hard, astute decision makings are beneficial, but they are limited if you don't have capital in the first place. Growing up in New York City in the 1980s, I could see the differences between the people I grew up with in Bedford-Stuyvesant versus those who I went to school with. I had the privilege of being able to go to an elite private school, Brooklyn Friends School. The individuals in both of the environments, the love, the care, they didn't vary that much. But what did vary was economic circumstance and what that could afford people. The typical Black family has less than a dime for every dollar in wealth as the typical white family. In fact, when Black households acquire more income or more education, if you compare them to their white counterparts, the gap does not reduce, it grows. I am the founding director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. Can you summarize what you're going to do in 2 pages? I'm a scholar and I'm a teacher. I love engaging with people over ideas, but it's not enough to do scholarship. It's not enough to have broad conceptions of how society works. We translate that into actionable policy. The idea around baby bonds is simply to ensure that every child has the benefits that's often exclusively reserved for the wealthy. Baby bonds are accounts that are seeded at birth, reserved by government until the child becomes of age, a young adult, and then those accounts are allowed to be used in wealth-building ways. Essentially, babies that are born into poverty as measured by Medicaid use. In July of 2023, the first baby to get a baby bonds in Connecticut happened. When they become 18 years old, that initial $3,200 will grow somewhere between $10,000 to $18,000, depending on how well the market does and how well those accounts are managed. And that child will be able to use that money to provide a down payment on a home, finance higher education, or start a business. People are not free if they don't have resource, if they don't have economic rights, if they don't have rights to capital. At the Institute, we're committed to building an economy grounded in human rights. We're investing in guaranteed income. We're investing in reparations. And guess what? It turns out it benefits us all. My name is Derek Hamilton. This is my brief but spectacular take on building a birthright to capital.
And you can watch more brief but spectacular videos at pbs.org/newshour/brief.
And join us again here tomorrow night for the analysis of David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.